And finally tonight, another in our ongoing series of conversations with Democratic and Republican presidential nomination candidates who are competing in the primary contests. Ray Suarez has tonight's.
Democrat Mike Gravel is a former two-term U.S. Senator from Alaska who served from 1969 to 1981. He was a strong critic of the Vietnam War and worked in the Senate to end the draft. He's with us now. Welcome.
Ray, thank you for having me.
Well, the big news from the campaign trail for many candidates today, the quarterly reports on fundraising. How'd you do?
I don't know. To tell you the truth, I don't know. For some candidates, it may be big news. It's not big news for me. Stop and think. We all know that money is the corrupting element of politics. Why should we pay attention to who's got big money, except to define who are the most corrupt running for office?
If you don't have big money, do you have what you need to keep the campaign going?
I sure do. I have this interview. This is big money. We're being viewed by thousands and thousands of Americans. They're going to hear my voice, not translated by watching a spot that I may pay $100,000 for. No, there's enough communication going on in this election that it may filter through. We just don't know. There's so many unknowns in this election. We don't know what the internet means. Here, I'm one of the top 3 in the internet and sometimes first. And yet in normal polling, I'm down there at 2%, sometimes 1%. Here, the union leader right now is saying I should get out of the race because I'm only at 1-2%. They don't say anything about Biden. They don't say anything about Edwards or Kucinich or the other. Here, I've come on the scene after an absence of 25 years, a whole generation, and I'm equal to these guys that have been in the news for the last decade or more.
I understand you've staked a lot of your own money, your life savings, on making this run. Why did you make that decision?
Well, first off, I used those life savings for the national initiative. On this campaign, I borrowed some money initially. Well, no, I didn't borrow money. I was paid money that was due me, and I used that in the campaign. But no, I've impoverished myself in this bankruptcy where with the credit cards. I used that credit card money to keep the National Initiative Foundation going. And then when I fell on a bad year of health, like so many Americans, I was forced to go bankrupt in order to protect my wife in case something had happened to me. But the issue is, from what floats my boat, Ray, is the central power of government is lawmaking. If the American people are ever to get a hold of their government, they have to become lawmakers. And I've drafted legislation to do just that. It's called the National Initiative. And so we now face a crisis in this country where we have a problem. The problem lies with government. They can't correct the problem. We now have to go to the people, and what we have to do is to empower them as lawmakers so they can then correct the problems that we have. We have a generic structural problem that cannot be corrected by the government. And so when these candidates are talking about change, they don't know what change is. Solving the problem of health care, those are policy decisions. I'm talking about fundamental change where the people are brought into the operation of government as lawmakers like they do in Switzerland, the only other country in the world where this exists.
Well, let me stop you right there. I want to understand better when you say that there's a structural problem with the country. What is it, and what is it that you're running to fix?
Well, the structural problem is that our founding fathers, in order to save slavery, I might add, fixed it so the American people could not make laws. Now, George Washington, all the founding fathers made statements to the effect that the American people should be able to make laws. When they make the statement that we should be able to change our government anytime we want, well, how do you do that? On the way to Philadelphia, for some reason, they left out the procedures for the people to make the changes. It's not in Article 5. That's where the government amends the Constitution. There's only one article, and that's Article 7, the creation article. And it's we, the people, do ordain. Now, if we, the people, have to ask permission of Congress and the states to do anything to change our government, then obviously we're not the sovereigns, we're not the creators. I mean, that language is ludicrous. And so if there's ever a chance, and the people are smarter than their leaders, we What would you trust, a decision made by a constituency, the majority of 130 million people, or the majority of 535 members of Congress who do unbelievably stupid things?
Let's talk a little bit more about why you decided to get in the race at an age where a lot of Americans are figuring out, how can I stress myself less? How can I work a little less? You're 77. Why put yourself through this?
I love my country, and I love the human race, and I want to see a change made in the leadership of our country so we can do more to protect the human race. Just on the environmental question alone, we're going to cook ourselves off the planet in 100 years. With respect to my country going to war when there's no reason to go to war, killing human beings, I'm ashamed of this. I'm ashamed of the leadership we have, whether it's Democratic leadership or Republican leadership. That's the reason why I'm in. I want to empower the people to make the changes in the structure of government and to turn around and provide leadership to end this war and end the policies that are just corrupting our whole process. We spend more on defense than all the rest of the world put together. Who are we afraid of? Certainly not the Chinese, who spend only 3%, or the Russians, who spend 4%. Who are we afraid of? Why do we spend all this money? It's sick, and with all this money, we go invade. Look what we're trying to do with Iran right now. Last week, the Lieberman resolution. He's the guy that wrote the resolution with Iraq and killed over 3,000 Americans and 1 million Iraqis. And now he comes forward with another resolution, and the leadership of the Democratic Party in the Senate doesn't even have the brains or the judgment to recognize what he's doing. Sanctions on the Republican Guard, they already have sanctions. The UN passed them in March, Resolution 1747. What is the game they're playing right now to have sanctions? I mean, this was AIPAC that put Lieberman up to do this. This is disaster. We invade Iran, and they'll use it as an excuse, just the way we did it in Cambodia and Laos. Oh, we got to go solve that problem right over the border because they're damaging our soldiers.
You're saying that the national legislature of this country, rather than doing the will of the citizens of the United States, passed that Iran resolution sanctioning the Republican Guard because of the American-Israeli Political Action Committee?
Wait a second. Yeah, there'll be some information coming out about how this thing was drafted. So the answer is yes, the short answer. But let me tell you how serious this is, Ray, because if we touch Iran and they respond, you're talking about, in the minimum, a world depression, because the oil industry will just get shut down at the Straits of Hormuz. That's the minimum. The worst that will happen will be a nuclear exchange. And I don't think we'll ever be able to contain, once they start shooting bombs at each other, nuclear devices. This is what's at stake with this resolution, and it's the height of immorality, irresponsibility, and the United States Senate, with the Democrats in charge, voted for the passage of this resolution. It doesn't get any worse than that, Ray.
A lot of people don't know much about your background, and it's an interesting one, so I want to spend a little time on that. Grew up in Massachusetts, the son of French-speaking immigrants from Canada. English your second language.
Correct.
Educated in New York City, but somehow, a short time later, Speaker of the House of Alaska, and eventually a U.S. Senator from there. How did that happen?
Well, I got to Alaska. I was broke. I've been in politics ever since I was 15 years old. I'm more of a theorist now and an activist, and that's the reason why I'm running. I'd much rather just be a theorist, believe me. Jack Kennedy had it right. Running for president is terrible. Being president is pretty good. And so I'm in the terrible stage right now. But I just think it's so important to do that. And I've been informed by one thing. Like I said, I went to Alaska. I was broke. And 12 years later, I'm sitting in the United States Senate, and I give an account of myself in the Senate. It was very controversial. People look back and say, ended the draft, released the Pentagon Papers, stopped the nuclear testing in the North Pacific, all of that. And of course, at the time, I was being excoriated by mainline media, mainstream media. Now, when we look back, think the guy's so courageous back then that he did that. Well, right now, the same thing is happening. What I hear from people on the street, you're a breath of fresh air. I wish I could turn that around to use it as a slogan, but it doesn't lend itself to that. What they're saying is they can recognize the garbage they're getting from the political process. And people want to change. They intuitively know that something is radically wrong with what is going on in our leadership. And I'm not talking about just the Republican leadership. I'm also talking about the Democratic leadership under the likes of Bill Clinton and the others.
Does the fact that you've been broke a couple of times, that you've driven a cab in